Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teamwork a Better Way. Special Friday episode, Spencer. I'm Christian Napier. This is Spencer Horn, one of my dearest friends. Spencer, how you doing?
Oh my gosh, I am so good, and it's a good day because I have a friend in Christian. So good to be with you.
Well, it's great to be with you, and it's been nice to get a little bit of rain and respite from the heat, although it's returning here. But we've got an amazing guest, Spencer, that you have lined up. And I can't wait for you to introduce him and to talk about our topic because I think it's so important, especially today.
Yeah, so today we have Gerritt Bake, who I have had the pleasure of meeting in this past year, and just absolutely love what he does and how what he stands for, his energy, his enthusiasm for entrepreneurship, especially in the construction space. And he's a founder of what's called the American Contractor Network, and these are services that he's providing for these businesses to help them succeed. And he has spent 15 years, Christian, working as a police officer in a variety of high profile positions, including SWAT and narcotics and gang units. And undercover, you see a lot of stuff, and you deal with a lot of stressful situations. And I think the training that he received was some of the best in the world to be able to deal with those high pressure situations. And he's been able to take that and really bring it over into the entrepreneur space, and focusing on contractors, because that's when he got out of the police service. I don't know if that's the way you say that. When he left the service in the police force, he started his own businesses, several of them, and he started a contracting company and a window washing business and landscaping business. And when he retired from that, he began helping other contractors. And because so many of the problems that exist in business, they're the same problems, and I'm sure Gerritt will talk a little bit about that. And so he developed a unique approach to be able to help these businesses succeed, and helping scale them to many 7 and 8 figure businesses, and while having more time for their life and spending less time at work, because so many small businesses are consumed, as you know, as an entrepreneur, by everything that it takes to run those businesses. And he's developed what's called the Build Pro framework, which is a game plan to help businesses, uh, and really taking the business leaders' lives to the next level. And he's married, the father of three. He's got incredible kids. I've had a chance to meet them. And he spends his free time giving back to the first responder community. Very cool. And as well as traveling and enjoying life with his family. And so today we're excited to talk to Gerritt about so many things like organization, accountability. So welcome, Gerritt Bake. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be with you, Christian and Spencer, the dynamic duo.
Well, so one of the things that people who are listening are going to want to know, what's it like to be undercover in narcotics and work on SWAT. What's that like, and how did you those are high pressure roles, and how did that help you as you transitioned into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, that's a good question, and also a very, very complex question. So I'll try to answer it as simply as possible. I'll tell you this, right? And everything that we do in life can be as simple or as complicated as we make it, right? And one of the reasons that I do what I do now is because I actually failed more than I succeeded, right? And so I went through that process of trying to figure out, how do you balance work and family life, right? How do you make progress without having to deal with a lot of the baggage that comes with growth and progress, right? So I think the best part of being a police officer was the ability and opportunity to serve, right, and give back to the community. But conversely, the other side of that is, you sacrifice yourself in the process, right? So it was that constant search for that balance between the two of those. How do you give, but without giving too much, where in the end you have nothing left to give either to your community or your family.
It's so important, because if you don't have anything left to give, it turns into a virtuous cycle of maybe destruction, right? I mean, because you don't have enough to give to your family. They don't have enough to give back to you. You go back into those dangerous situations, and you're not present. I mean, there's just so much pressure and stress. I can only imagine. I mean, I've had my own balance issues, but not in life or death situations.
Yeah, and you hit the nail on the head there, Spencer. It doesn't matter what you do for work. If you're in any type of leadership position, you're having to deal with some type of balance, right? And as the two of you know, dealing with the organizations that either you've worked with or worked for, businesses don't have problems. They have people in their problems, right? And you are a person too, and add your problems to the pile. And the better you get at understanding how to deal with your own, the better you are at dealing with other people's problems as well.
Well, I've got a question for you. I think it's interesting you spend, and maybe we'll get into the careers in law enforcement in a bit, but I want to ask about this transition from law enforcement to entrepreneurship because, as you talked about, it was challenging at times, as you said, finding balance in law enforcement with personal life and the work life and everything. Well, it's also different to find that in entrepreneurship because you basically live and breathe that job. So I'm curious to hear, what drew you to entrepreneurship instead of saying, okay, I want to go get the 9 to 5 desk job where, I clock in, I clock out, I go home, I'm done. What was it that took you to the entrepreneurship route?
More punishment.
Right. From one frying pan into another.
No, it's a great question. I actually, oddly enough, got my degree in business management while I was working as a police officer. But my first foray into being a business owner was actually when my first son was born. I started a window washing business, because that's a smart thing to do with a brand new baby and a wife who's working full time. And that lasted for a couple years, and then back into the world of working for someone else. And then I actually had my second contracting business when I was a landscaper. I had that while I was working as a police officer. So you want to talk about balance. I was working as a landscaper from 6 a.m. till about noon. I'd go home and shower and shave and take care of the necessities. And then I'd hit police work from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. There was no balance, right? And so it was interesting. You talk about what made me want to do that. Well, there was a couple things, right? Number one, I'm sure you guys talk about behavior profiling and patterns and natural tendencies that people have. I've always had the tendency to lead. I've always loved leadership and the opportunity to lead. And I had those opportunities working as a police officer, but government has a lot of red tape, and things that could have been done more quickly and more efficiently never really were. And so I got to the point where I really wanted to kind of test things for myself and say, hey, I've got this skill set, I've got this framework, I've got these things that I've learned. What would it look like if I didn't have these restrictions?
But you just traded restrictions, from the government to restrictions of, how do you make your life successful and not go broke? I mean, there's other constraints that you deal with, especially if you're an entrepreneur, small businesses. That pressure can feel life and death, like life and death, because you are every day worried about keeping the lights on, and so that pressure is incredible. So one of the themes that's really important to you is accountability. Will you talk about that and just the strategies that you use to really be able to be accountable to the community, to the government, to your family, to your business? And what did you learn, and what do you teach? And I know you're an incredible teacher. I've seen you teach. You are really good at getting people involved. So how did you talk about your accountability process?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. Accountability for me is something I struggled with a lot growing up, and I think I found comfort through sports, right? And I was lucky enough to have what we would call the old school coach, right? If you screwed up, you were doing burpees or you're doing laps or you're doing up downs or you're doing something. And at the time you saw it as punishment, right? You saw it as, oh, I screwed up and now I got to do this thing. But what I came to understand is that accountability is really what unlocks an individual's potential. And I learned it proactively through my police career, and now applying it to business outside of that. And if you're a business owner or entrepreneur or even thinking about it, I want you to think about what I'm saying, but through the lens of what you're experiencing right now. So think about it this way. I was part of the SWAT team for many years, and people don't understand how much training goes into being in a specialty position like that. There's a lot of military units that are the same way, the Rangers, the SEALs. They do a lot of training. In fact, I was watching a clip from a video the other day of a sniper in the Marine Corps who said that he would go through an entire box of ammunition a day, or a case, I should say, of ammunition a day, right? So you talk about repetition, repetition, repetition. But what really kind of changed things for me was when I became part of the SWAT team, because as a police officer, there's accountability. Sure. You have a supervisor, you have a squad, you're responsible for the calls in your district. You have to make sure you stay up to date on your reports. There's a certain level of accountability, but the SWAT team kind of took it to the next level, because what they taught me is the mentality of accountability, right? So for example, every time we would deploy, we would always have what we called an operations plan. Now, what's an operations plan? Well, it tells us exactly what's going to happen, how's it going to happen, and then what role everyone plays in making sure that that actually happens. Then, and this is one of the most important parts, at the end of that operation, we would all gather around and we would repeat, okay, what was your responsibility, Gerritt? Oh, I had this. Okay, how did it go? Did you do well or did you not do well? And then anyone in the group that thought either you did a good job or, more importantly, you screwed up, had an opportunity to voice their concerns. And when it first happened to me, of course, I screwed up because I was a new guy. It was hard to receive criticism back from somebody that you respected, right? But what I realized is that criticism was the key to getting better. If you spend too much time sugarcoating or making somebody feel good or worried about offending someone, you actually are hurting them more than helping them. And so in those situations, you wanted that raw, that real, that honest feedback, whether it came from them, just being a mentor and that type of tone, or they were legitimately angry at you because you really screwed something up, right? And so imagine, for example, if you're going into a house and you're looking for a bad guy and he's got, a warrant for attempted murder and he's hiding somewhere and he's got a weapon. Well, you're going to go into the house, but you got to be super careful because you don't want to get hurt. You definitely don't want one of your teammates to get hurt. So we had certain procedures on how to, what we call, dominate a room. And so I'd go in if I was the first one and I'd go right. Well, when I turn right, what's exposed? My back, my entire backside. And so if someone's hiding in that corner, they've got a free shot at me, right? So the second person's job is to step in almost simultaneously and cover my back, right? And that way we're covering each other. Okay. Third person steps in and steps into the center of the room. So we dominate the room as quickly as possible. Why? Because if there's a threat, we want to be able to handle it. But then we also don't want to leave one of our teammates exposed. And there were a couple times when I should have gone right and I went left. And because I did that, the second person who was supposed to go left had to now consciously think about, oh, wait, he went left. I was supposed to go left. Now I have to go right. So there's a delay. Now, ultimately, I was the one that was exposed, but it wasn't his fault, right? It was my fault. And so this was day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year of accountability. And after a while, you start to crave it. I would crave people to tell me, hey, what is wrong? What did we screw up? What can we do better? Because my feelings weren't ever going to get me the results that I wanted. Only the facts were. So when we talk about accountability, it's not just about an accountability chart and having clear roles and responsibilities. It's really unlocking the potential of the individual. And the only way to unlock the potential of every individual in your organization, including you, is through accountability.
I mean, I love that mindset that you talked about, because you're like, the only way I can get better. So that's where the mindset started, is you recognized that you could get better. But that's a cognitive approach. If I know personally that, because of my personality, I'm totally into behavioral, analysis and tendencies, and most of my tendencies are to reject that feedback, because I want to be the one who's making great choices, and you're not supporting me, and that is a huge failure. But I had to come to that understanding cognitively. I imagine there was something else besides just that understanding. What did it take for you, with that relationship that you had with your, with your leaders, with your team members, for you to be able to accept that, though? I mean, there has to be some conditions for you to get over that initial pushback and resistance. What was that?
Great question. And you know this because you and I have very similar behavior patterns.
Problematic behavior patterns. I'm telling. In my case, anyway. I don't know about you, but for me,
you can call them problematic. I call them, opportunistic. But
they are, of course,
the same thing. But regardless of your behavior pattern, right? You tend to gravitate towards people who are like you, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of the SWAT team members were what we would call alpha personalities, right? Yeah. Very aggressive, very want to be leaders, so on and so forth. And in that environment, typically on the street, what would that be? Well, that would be, one gang wanting to fight another gang, or one guy at the bar wanting to fight another guy at the bar, or, you know what I mean? In all these, and you see these conflicts and these confrontations, sports are the same. But what changed was you actually caring more for the other individual than you actually cared for yourself, right?
So it's that
because
connection.
as I was mentioning, it's that connection, because it's not just about you, right? Do I want to go home at night? Yeah, I got a wife, I got kids. Like, I want to go home at night, but I also have a buddy who's got a wife and has kids. And then I have my other friend who's married and has kids. And then, so it's really, what am I willing to do to make myself better, that by making myself better, I'm actually helping and protecting the people around me.
Well, I've got a question to follow up on this, because it seems to me, and again, I don't come from that environment, so I'm looking at it from perhaps a different lens. But when I look at that, it seems to me that when you accept those kinds of assignments, you go into those kinds of organizations, they have this kind of culture established, right? You walk in there and you assimilate yourself into this kind of a culture, right? And everybody buys into it, because the stakes are so high. If we don't buy into it, we could be dead, So we all accept this kind of a culture, and it's not established overnight necessarily. And so I'm curious, when you go help a business, and they hear this story, and I want that kind of culture. How do I build that? Because I can't just like flip this switch and then all of a sudden, my company's running like a SWAT team. So how do you actually translate that experience that you've had into helping leaders create a plan that will help them transform their own organizations? Because, I can listen to you and I get super pumped. I'm like, yes, that's what I want to do. And then I go away and I'm like, well, how am I going to do that? I don't know. I mean, and maybe I'm not even the alpha personality, because Spencer and I have very different personalities. How could I possibly build this kind of culture of authentic accountability in my organization?
Gerritt, we need and crave Christians on the team.
Oh, 100%. Like, trust me, I've tried to play the game of like all alphas, and it's a train wreck.
It's a train wreck.
So great question. So Christian, I think number one and the most important thing is leadership. Understanding that leadership starts at the top, right? It's not recruiting a bunch of what you perceive to be leaders. It's really you understanding that you're a leader, right? And either success or failure of your organization or your team is 100% your responsibility. Right? There's a book by the Arbinger Institute called Leadership and Self-Deception. And it's one of the best books I've ever read, because the biggest hurdle that every leader has to overcome is the understanding that whether it works or it doesn't work, it's still your fault, right? Because when you're in control, then you can do something. So when we talk about the culture of an organization, there's a couple things that come into play, right? Number one is your organization, i.e. your culture, is a reflection of you. The problem is that most business owners don't go in consciously thinking of, okay, what type of culture do I want to create? They go in thinking of either the results that they want to get out of the organization or the type of people that they want to have inside of their organization. And it's not that it's a bad thing, it's that they don't set the framework or the foundation for the culture of the organization. So one of the first things that I always have people do is a core values exercise. Why? Because I want them to know who they are, and conversely, the type of culture that they want to create inside of their organization. Not every team is going to be like the SWAT team. And that's a good thing. You don't want that, right? But you can still have the same level of accountability inside of there. All accountability is again, a clear plan, a clear understanding of what the roles and responsibilities are for each member inside of that team or organization. And then the ability to come back afterwards and dissect what worked on a project, what worked for the quarter, what worked for the year, what didn't work, and ultimately what needs to happen to make it better next time. So accountability, again, is about results. It's not necessarily just about putting a bunch of alpha personalities in a room.
You know, when you talk about feedback, I spend, Gerritt, more time working on senior executives giving feedback in a way that can actually be received, because they don't have that culture. First of all, that and based on how you perceive the world, if someone gives you feedback and you feel like that they're somehow hurting you or don't have your best interest at heart, you know, you talked about having each other's best interest at heart, then you take that feedback as an attack, as punishment, like the burpees, right? But if, on the other hand, you perceive that person has your best interest at heart, it's easier to accept that. The challenge is most leaders, and I'm in my experience, I want to see if you notice this too in yours, is that most leaders don't give feedback necessarily in a way that people can hear. You know, in a life or death situation, it's like, hey, you went left, you were supposed to go right. That more of what happens is people are, maybe they're not achieving their goals, or they're, you know, consistently, or they're showing up late, and you don't know why, and you allow those behaviors to continue without addressing them the proper way. Instead of, most leaders just sit down and say, you need to do this, you need to change this, you need to do X, Y, and Z. Well, the problem with that type of accountability or feedback is there's no ownership on the part of the person you're talking to. You're telling them what you want them to do instead of getting them to buy in. And most leaders don't know how to create the kind of accountability where people want to give their discretionary effort and want to do things for the organization, which are the behaviors that lead to the results. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I just see so many leaders that are telling instead of helping people find their own internal accountability. Does that make sense?
It does. And really what you're talking about is kind of the next level of accountability. And, you know, at a very surface level, you know, I'm a very black and white person, right? So here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's the role that everyone's playing in getting there. Ready, break, right? But underneath that, as you know this, and I've heard you speak before, right? There's different types of personalities. There's different types of leadership styles. There's all these different pieces to the puzzle, if you will. And as a leader, you have to get good at reading people, right? So we talk about culture, not just attracting the right people to the organization, but as you mentioned, you don't always want the same type of person in the organization. You want different behaviors. You want different strengths, right? That's what makes you a more robust company.
But that makes different problems.
It does too. It does too. But as a leader, and this is where, you know, I had to learn how to do this outside of police work. Well, two things. Number one was how to listen. If you ask my wife, the first 15 years of our marriage was a whole lot of me talking and not a lot of me listening. And I had to learn that in order for our marriage to survive, you know, and continue in the direction that I wanted it to go. So I think listening is the most important thing, right? When you bring somebody in to talk about more often than not, things that didn't work the way that they were supposed to, or aren't being done the way that you want them to, you'll get way more out of someone by asking questions than you will demanding answers, right? And Chris Voss, I'm sure you're familiar with him, wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. He was an FBI hostage negotiator for many years. And he has this methodology of what he calls active listening, right? And inside of it, of course, he puts it in the framework of his job, which was negotiating with terrorists and with bad people doing bad things. But really, it's the same. Is you can be a very good listener, and you can get to the root of every problem without actually sacrificing not only who you are, but the results that you want to get. And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing, there's a gentleman by the name of Dan Martell. He's business owner and I think he's also a business coach. But I was listening to him a couple of years ago, and he brought up this really good point that I've implemented in my business, and then also passed on to other people. And he calls it the 1-3-1 rule. He said businesses are going to have problems, like we keep talking about. He said, but if you can train your people on not coming to you with problems, but coming to you with solutions, then it changes, as we're talking about, the culture of your organization, right? And you mentioned when you were on my show, talking about positioning yourself as a leader as being the solution to all things. And then, well, the business can't grow because everybody's dependent on you. Well, Dan talks about this, 1-3-1 rule, where he says, if you can get an individual in your organization to identify the one problem, sure, there might be 15 things going wrong, but what's the real root problem, the one problem, and get them to think through 3 potential solutions to that problem, and then be able to identify the best of those 3 solutions. Now, instead of coming to you with a problem, they're coming to you with a solution to that problem, right? And so now, not only are you training people to be accountable, to identify problems, but also solutions to problems, but now you're also training them not to be dependent on you, right? So I think it's kind of a combination of those 2 things, which is the next level of accountability. Number 1 is your ability to listen and get to the root of that problem. But then number 2 is now training your people to be problem solvers instead of problem finders.
I love, hold on.
Wow.
What did I just do?
Spencer's doppelganger has appeared along with Spencer. We got Spencer in stereo here.
I don't know what just happened. So
I like it though. I want to follow up on this though, because I think it's fantastic now that we've got 2 Spencers. But coming back to this idea of accountability, listening, and then letting people come to you, or training them to come to you with solutions, not just problems. I don't know if it's the denominator, I think, of accountability is trust. If you don't have any trust in your people, then you won't afford them the opportunity to do what's assigned to them. You talked about accountability, like, hey, we all have our assignments, we have our roles and responsibilities. Going to sports, like you like, we hear the term in American football, assignment sound, right? So everybody plays their role, they fill their gaps. If someone doesn't, or if I see, oh, well, somebody's dropped, maybe I try to compensate for that person, and then I leave my area vulnerable and I get attacked on that area, and the opponent scores on me. And so, I'd like to ask you about the role that trust plays with accountability, and how you develop trust, build trust in your team, so that you have confidence to delegate the things that you should be delegating to them, and not trying to be accountable for everything yourself.
Great question. I want to start off with a phrase that we use, and it came from the military, but we used it all the time. And it's trust but verify, right? And it's an understanding that I want to trust you, but it's also my responsibility to make sure you're doing the thing that you're supposed to be doing, right? So I think that's important when it comes to anything involving teams or a leadership position or so on and so forth. But it kind of goes back to, one of the things that a lot of business owners don't have is what we call a hiring process, right? And I know we've talked a little bit about behavior profiling, which is great, right? It helps give you kind of a lens, a look inside the person and say, what's the likelihood that they're going to succeed in this position? So you have a higher likelihood of success. But regardless, you also have a training opportunity, right? When you hire somebody, if you hire me for a sales position and I had a resume, it says 20 year sales experience, and you interview me and I'm a nice guy and you're like, man, I really think this guy can succeed, and you hire me, well, that's great. But now you're assuming that I'm going to be a good salesperson because you like me and because I got 20 years experience. When the truth is, I could be horrible at sales, but you don't know that. I'm just really good at talking to people and I got 20 years of bouncing around from job to job, right? So the hiring process itself is where you start to build this trust and this accountability. Now, going back to police work at every level of the organization that I was in, starting off with being a recruit on the streets, as soon as we hit the streets, I had 4 months of field training, right? So we had 5 months in the academy and then 4 months of field training. Well, field training had 4 what we called phases. Phase 1, I sat in the passenger seat, my FTO or field training officer drove, and he told me what to do. And I just either wrote down people's information or ran a card or, wrote a report, whatever. I literally just mostly sat there, but just did whatever he told me to do. Right. So it was the watch me phase, watch me do it. The second one, phase 2, now I'm driving, but he's in the passenger seat and we're kind of working together. Okay, here's an accident. What do we do on an accident? Oh, here's a guy who was speeding. What do we do here? Oh, we're taking someone to jail. What do we do? And so we're working together. Right. So phase 2 is the do it with me phase. Phase 3, I was on my own. He was in the passenger seat, but he wasn't saying anything. He wasn't involved, of course, unless there was an emergency and he needed to be. But he would literally just sit there and just take notes. And at the end of the shift, we would talk about what he saw and, what was working and what wasn't, and maybe some corrections that I could make. And then the last phase, he was actually in a different vehicle and he would just shadow me. I would take the calls. I would do the traffic stops. I would take someone to jail. He would just kind of follow along, right? Now, the reason they have those 4 phases is because by the end of the 3rd phase, if you can't figure out how to do this job on your own, it's probably not what you should be doing, right? As a business owner, because we have too many feelings involved, and this doesn't mean don't have feelings, but because we have too many feelings tied to that process, I spent so much time and so much money and so much energy hiring who I believe is this right person, that we start to lax on trust and accountability because we throw accountability in the back seat and we just throw trust and say, okay, you drive, right? But again, the person may not know what is expected of them, how it's expected of them, so on and so forth. And so trust and accountability are partners, but they start at the beginning when you first hire the person. So it's really hard. And if you're watching or listening to this, I get it. You have an organization, you're 5, 10, 15 years old. You've had people that have been with you for years. It's hard to change culture when you're not changing people because trust and accountability haven't been working together since day one. So it's going to take a while. But if you're at a position where you're a younger organization or you're a smaller organization and you want to start building, the best way to build is to put trust and accountability next to each other in everything that you do.
Okay, so you're great feedback, but think of the business owner that's listening to this saying, I just lost somebody. I'm already down, a person. And now I need to spend time hiring them, sorting through all the prospects to find the right one, and then spend how much time training them. I can't even keep my head above water with the team that I have. I'm shorthanded already. How am I going to dedicate that time? And so what ends up happening is that training gets short shrift because they're so stretched. HR departments they're working so many hours and they just can't keep up with the demand, especially in construction, because there's such a shortage of people who want to do the work. And so many construction companies are struggling to have a full deck of cards. What do you say to that business owner that is in that treading water phase and like, I can't, how do I find time to transition to the training so that I can get out of this mess?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, they all got to take a deep breath. Like, it's always worst case scenario, right? What's the worst case scenario? Now, obviously in police work, it was a little more of a worst case than say in construction, but regardless, it's a worst case scenario,
This
right?
is this is a high pressure situation.
Yeah, but I always take them to worst case scenario, right? What's the worst thing that could happen? The worst thing that could happen is your business implodes. That's the worst thing that could happen. And then what? Now, this is funny because a lot of business owners, that's like the scary thing in the back of their mind that they don't want to talk about. But when you think about it, the worst thing that's going to happen is I declare bankruptcy. I close my doors. Okay. And then what? Well, then I'll probably start over again. Okay. So the worst thing that's going to happen is you take all your knowledge, skills, and experience and you start over. That's the worst thing that's going to happen. And when they can get over that fear, it's like, okay, are there a lot of fires burning? Yes. But what's the big fire that I need to deal with? Right. So it's a prioritization thing. But more specifically to the question that you asked, right? Every problem in a business falls in one of two categories. It's a process problem or it's a person problem. That's it. There's nothing else. And so when we talk about, I don't have time for hiring, I don't have time for training, I don't have time for whatever the thing is, what you're really saying is not that you don't have time for, it's that you don't have a process behind it, right? Because a process standardizes things, right? It makes things function the same, right? It allows you to run things in a more efficient manner so that, hey, I already have a job description for this project management roles, for example. I already know what I'm looking for. And so when the resumes come in, here's my first filter. Second filter, obviously you and I like to use behavior profiling. Take this quick assessment. All right. So now I have 3 candidates. What is the next thing? Well, I'm a huge advocate of job specific interviews, right? So instead of just coming in and you telling me about how awesome you are and all your experience, I'm going to run you through a scenario of like, hey, here's what's happening on this job site. What do you think we should do? Well, if you've got the experience and you've dealt with it before, you're going to give me an answer and it's probably going to be the answer I'm looking for, or you're not, right? So everything is just a process. So I always take it back to that when people are like, I'm shorthanded, I need to hire somebody. You don't need to hire somebody. You need to hire the right person. But before you hire the right person, you got to get that other thing figured out first, right? What are the roles and responsibilities? What are the processes that I need inside of there at a very high level now, but eventually detailed, but a very high level so that when I bring somebody on, it's not oh, wait, I got to answer this phone. So John, hold on. Wait, we got to go to this job site. So we're going to skip this. And in the end, all they're doing is shadowing you, which doesn't really do anything because now you're just paying somebody to be your roommate in your car, right? So again, process or person problem. If you're shorthanded, figure out why you're shorthanded and where, figure out what exactly you need that person to do and just work it backwards. And then the other thing, and people don't realize this, whether you're completely fully staffed or not, always be in hiring mode. It doesn't mean you're actually going to hire them, but you're always in hiring mode. I would rather have a pool of 4 or 5 qualified project managers ready for me to hire because I've already interviewed them, I've already vetted them. I know they're good so that when the company hits that next level or that next project is secured, I know I need a project manager. I don't have to start at 0. I've got a pool of qualified candidates that I can just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, John, we're ready to hire." "Oh, you're good where you're at? Or you found another job? Okay, cool. On to the next, instead of freaking out about now we're shorthanded.
Great advice. And sorry, Christian, just one observation. I love this is very similar to what you said in the beginning. Most entrepreneurs are looking for the results first instead of the culture. So you're talking about Stephen Covey said first things first, right? You're talking about processes and systems. You're talking about culture and values, and you're building a foundation that will make things easier as you go, is what I'm hearing you say.
Okay, now to my question.
Sorry, Christian.
No apology needed at all, but I find this conversation fascinating, right? So, not all business leaders or entrepreneurs are naturally adept at creating systems and processes, right? They may have great ideas. They may be super creative. They may be inspirational. They may be great at relationships. they may not be very good at these processes and systems. And so, and we learn from your experience in law enforcement that processes get fine-tuned over time. You iterate and you repeat over and over and over again, right? So you're probably not going to get it right the first time, which means that learning from your mistakes can be very expensive because you have to continually refine. So this is where I want to kind of transition and ask you a little bit about this Build Pro framework that you've created, right? Okay, maybe to shortcut my process, and I don't use that in a derogatory or negative way, but I can build on the lessons that other people have learned who have created successful systems, and I can learn to incorporate those into my own business rather than me having to learn all that myself, figure it all out myself. So tell me a little bit about this Build Pro framework that you created, how you created it, and how it's being used to help business owners and leaders achieve success.
Yeah, good question. I think that a lot of business owners, including contractors, look at it as a point of pride to point at their wall and go, "Hey, look, I got a master's degree from the School of Hard Knocks," right? And they like to talk about the bumps and the bruises and the cuts and the scrapes and the broken bones and the thousands or tens of thousands of dollars that they paid for that degree, right? And it's a sense of pride. But you don't actually have to get a master's degree from the School of Hard Knocks. Now, are you going to experience life and business? Sure, that's part of the game, and I am fully 100% behind the concept of you have to learn the lesson before you can move on. That being said, it doesn't mean that you can't have tools at your disposal to learn that lesson quicker, right? So the Build Pro system was created with two things in mind, right? Number one is an understanding of where a business eventually wants to end up. And the second thing is, what are the pieces that will help it get there, right? So think about this. The two of you are in business, the two of you consult businesses. At the end of the day, every single business is going to experience an exit, right? I should say every business owner is going to experience an exit. And it's either going to be, the person passes on, the person sells to their kids, there's an employee buyout, they get rolled up with another company, there's a merger, right? There's going to be an exit that's going to happen. And if exit is the end game, then why aren't you building towards that exit right now? And having conversations with multiple private equity partners, equity groups and whatnot, who are actively looking, in my space for contracting businesses to purchase, there's a set of criteria that they're looking for, right? And so what we did is we said, okay, what are the criteria that they're looking for? How do we take that, combine it with basic business principles, and create a system that will help contractors build the business that they want today, but that is ready for them if at some point, there's an emergency or some life change or whatever happens, they can walk away confident knowing that their business will sell for the amount that they know that it's worth, right? So the first thing that we look at is what we call a business operating system. And that's what the Build Pro system is. How do I run a business the same way every single time, right? This is the systems and processes game. Now, you brought that up, Spencer. I'm not a systems and process guy naturally. I'm not. It's something that I have to learn. Now, to kind of caveat just for a moment, if you're not a systems and process guy, well, congratulations, it's 2024. There's a couple things available to you. The first one is our friend ChatGPT, which can do a lot for you. So if you're having an issue, you can literally ask ChatGPT, hey, I am a residential remodeler that works in this area. I have these types of employees. Here's my business model. Help me create a simple SOP for ordering materials, right? And it'll give you a starting point, and then all you got to do is fill in the blanks. The second way to do it is more of a manual way, but it can also be done. Find someone who knows nothing about your business, and then have them ask you question after question after question. And the question is, and then what? Job comes in, and then what? And I make the material list, and then what? And as you go answering this question, eventually you'll create at least your first version of your SOP. And as you mentioned, Christian, there's constant refinement. So those two things. But going back to the big picture, right, is creating a business operating system, right? That's what a business needs. How do we do the same thing every single time? What makes the SWAT team elite isn't the weapons or the vehicles or the cool gear that they carry. It's the repetitions that they put in to do the same thing every single time, so that I know that John behind me, if this situation happens, I'm going to do this. I already know what he's doing, right? Because we've worked together for so long and we follow the same process, right? The second thing is a business that can run without the owner. And this is where ego takes a hit, because at the end of the day, you became a business owner because you wanted to be in charge. But in order to have a business that's worth more, you actually want a business that runs without you, which actually means you're not in charge, right? So it's kind of a little play there. But you want to have a team in place that you can sell with the business, because you can't sell yourself, nor do you want to. I don't want to sell a business for $5 million, but I'm required to stay on for 36 months as the quote unquote general manager. Now I'm not even the owner anymore, but I got to stay on for 36 months. Like, who wants that? But if you build a business that runs without you, now you have a sellable asset, right? And then the third thing is profitability, which I know this conversation isn't about that. But how do we have a business that's profitable at a certain level? Be that 15, 20, 25, 30% net profit. That's what becomes attractive. So the Build Pro system was created to help contractors build a business that, one, they could enjoy the lifestyle that they want to now, but then two, when that time comes, because it will, they're able to sell for the amount of money that they want to sell for, and then walk off into the sunset.
You know, you talked about the 131 system. That actually falls into exactly what you're talking about. There's a business leader from the 80s and 90s. His name was Ralph Steyer, and he was the CEO of Johnsonville Sausages. He wrote one of the greatest Harvard Business Review articles of all time, saying how I learned to let my workers lead. But the whole idea was the business wasn't growing past him. He was that bottleneck in the growth of the business. And same thing, you know, you gotta get out of your own way many times, and really let the business begin to grow when you're not there. And that is hard to do. But it starts with little things like that 131, teaching your people to start to think critically. He got so serious about helping his leaders grow and develop, he put a sign on his desk, and because everyone would always come to him for approval and questions. It feels good to have everybody come to you, right? You've got all the answers, you've got all the experience. Back in the day, this is how we did it, right? That's what a lot of construction leaders are talking like. And the sign said, the answer is the question. Which is kind of that 131. What's the problem that you have? What are 3 ideas, and what do you suggest? So throw it back at them to start to help them to think. Well, here's my last question. We're kind of coming up against it, but you have talked a lot about systems and structure and discipline, and how do you balance that with flexibility and creativity and innovation?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's a healthy balance between the two, right? But for me, I'm a more of a guidelines, outcome oriented person than I am a process oriented person naturally, right? And this is regardless of whether you're a process driven person or an outcome driven person, you have to realize there's a certain place that you want to get to, right? And in order to get there, you have to establish the parameters. And this is where, again, allowing that space for your team, your leaders inside of your team, or even yourself to make some mistakes. But as long as you're staying inside of those lines and headed where you need to get to, then it's acceptable, right? And in manufacturing, I don't have a ton of experience in manufacturing, but in manufacturing, you know, there's these certain set of parameters that as long as we're within those parameters, we're good. It's funny if you go to large corporations, big box companies, there's something called shrink, which I'm sure you're familiar with, right? Which is how much are we willing to let walk out the door, lose, and still be within where we need to be for our profitability and so on and so forth. Well, Circle K, convenience store, I always wondered, because late at night, what do we always get calls as a police officer? You get the beer runs, right? Well, between 11 p.m. and like 2:30, 3 a.m., It's the beer runs. Well, they used to lock everything inside of coolers, which made it a lot easier. But somebody had the bright idea that, hey, we should have displays of beer cans, 18 packs, 12 packs by the door. And these guys would just walk in the door, take 3 or 4 18 packs, walk to their car, and then, take off. It was a beer run. And we would go because they would call the police of the theft, but we couldn't find the person, didn't have a description and whatnot. And we said, what do you guys want to do? Well, actually, we don't want to do anything. And we were surprised because they actually accounted for that in their big picture, their budget and so on and so forth. They allowed for that variability, if you will. Hey, we know that we're going to lose 3% to theft, and we're okay with that. Walmart's the same way, right? So as a business owner, it's important to understand that even if you're a perfectionist, it's not going to be perfect. And that's okay. You have to start thinking towards the outcome. If you're an outcome-oriented person, you have to realize that you need guardrails, right? You need parameters, because if not, you'll end up in left field somewhere and wondering how you got there. So it's kind of a combination of everything. You're looking at accountability, right? You're looking at structure, systems, and processes. You're looking at building your leaders, but it's all within what you believe to be the guardrails, the framework, right? What you believe is acceptable for you as a leader.
Wow. Great advice. And this, like I said, this has been a fascinating conversation. I've taken a lot of notes down here, Gerritt. I appreciate you taking almost an hour out of your day to join us and have this conversation with us and with our viewers and listeners. And if those folks who are tuning in want to learn more about what you do, about the Build Pro framework, about the American Contractor Network, or they just want to learn more about Gerritt, what's the best way for folks to reach out and connect with you?
Thanks, Christian. The best way to do it is really to follow me on social media. As you can tell, I like to be in front of a camera, so I talk a lot, but I have a lot of stuff that I like to put out there. In fact, most of my stuff is free because I believe that there's a lot of information out there that, could be valuable for you in the moment. So let's see if we can get that to you. But if you want to have a conversation with me, you can send me a direct message through social media. I'm on all the social media platforms, or you can go to AmericanContractorNetwork.com. There's a calendar link there. You can schedule some time where we can talk one-on-one.
All right, fantastic. And Spencer, you've spent decades helping teams around the globe achieve high performance and developing leaders. What's the best way for people to reach out and connect with you?
Thank you, Christian. Just LinkedIn, Spencer Horn. Find me on LinkedIn, and where can people find Christian Napier's brilliance?
Where's Waldo? Let's see, the red and white striped shirt. No. LinkedIn as well. Yeah, just look me up on LinkedIn. Happy to connect with anyone there on LinkedIn. And thank you, listeners, viewers, for tuning in. Thank you, Gerritt, for sharing so much wisdom and insight and experience with us today. Viewers, listeners, please like and subscribe to our podcast, and we'll catch you again soon.